Hello, everyone, and welcome to Education in Focus, powered by Chalkboard News. I'm Dan McCaleb, Vice President of News and Content at the Franklin News Foundation, publisher of chalkboardnews.com. Chalkboard is a news website dedicated to issues related to K through 12 education. Joining me again today is Brendan Clary, Chalkboard's K through 12 editor. How are you, Brendan?
I'm doing all right, Dan. Doing all right. Trying to ward off the snow and cold weather here. So how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. It is, I guess it's not officially winter yet, Brendan, but it is December in the great North Midwest where we both live. So we're stuck with it at least till through March or into March anyway.
Yep. Gray skies and lake effect snow. So
always fun. We are recording this, Brendan, on Monday, December 4th. The U.S. Department of Education is still working on new Title IX rules that would require K through 12 schools and colleges and universities to allow transgender athletes compete in the sport of their choice, or their schools would face a potential loss in federal funding. The final decision was expected in October, but has been pushed back. Tell us more about this, Brendan, and what it means.
Yeah, what you said is absolutely true. It's a case-by-case basis. So right now, it basically would try to bridge the gap between what some states have put in place, which would be a ban sort of wholesale on transgender athletes participating in the sport that, aligns with their gender identity and maybe not their biological, like the sex that they were assigned at birth, right? So this is kind of trying to bridge that middle ground and saying basically colleges, universities, and K through 12 schools would have to decide on a case-by-case basis, on an individual basis, whether or not a student is eligible for a sport. And it has some, specific sort of metrics in place to try to give that power to, these schools. One of the pushbacks against that, Dan, is that, different schools might have different opinions about this, or, there's some competition between schools. So what happens when you run into those kinds of conflicts there? But yeah, what you mentioned as well is the department, was supposed to have this final rule, notice of proposed rulemaking done in October, but they got a massive amount of comments on this and another action that ties Title IX funding to different kinds of policies, like I think bathroom access and other things as well. So there's a number of these different federal Title IX regulations, and Title IX, for people who are not maybe super aware of that, is part of the civil rights law that governs the responsibility that educational institutions have to students. And so this basically says, we can withhold federal funding if you're not meeting these things. So yeah, it's a big change and it basically would target some specific states, right, who have had legislation passed that limits, the transgender students from participating on a sport team that maybe aligns with their gender identity.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit, Brendan, separately from this story, but really related to this story. You wrote this week at chalkboardnews.com about some significant criticism over a Massachusetts state law that allows boys, this is not a transgender issue, allows boys to play girls' sports when the school does not itself have that specific sport. In this specific case, we're talking about field hockey. This particular high school in Swampscott, Massachusetts, does not have field hockey for boys, so a boy was allowed to join the girls' team, and the boy, not on purpose, but hurt significantly one of the girls' players when he threw the field hockey ball across, I don't know if he was shooting or what the action was, but it hit a girl in the face, knocked out a bunch of her teeth, suffered a concussion, etc. That is calling into question this Massachusetts state law that does allow boys, again, not a transgender issue, boys who identify as boys to play a girl sport and then seriously injuring a girl. Any lessons learned here? What's going on with that?
Yeah, I think, the hard part about this is that, field hockey is sort of a violent sport. I mean, as is ice hockey, right? That, there's a lot of sort of aggressive movements taken. I mean, you have different, you have a ball and you have, a lot of sticks and people kind of running into each other. And so it is maybe a more violent sport than some other ones. And there's not a lot of protective gear. I mean, that's another thing that has been raised by this is, maybe there are different things to come out of that in terms of the field hockey and how that's played. But there has been some criticism of, if you have biological males playing with females, that they are stronger, that they have, maybe more speed, and that it does bring into question, fairness and also safety. And so that is tied to some of the concerns around the Title IX rules, right? Because if you have biological males or who now identify as girls and are trying to play on girls' sports teams, there is a question there of, are they going to put girls on those sports teams in danger, right? If they're, stronger and they're able to, leverage the ball faster, in different kinds of sports, it takes different, I think, things. And that is part of the case by case approach, I think, of the Title IX rulings that have been proposed, the proposed rules there, that would change that.
So when you say case by case, let me make an assumption here. That generally means that states that have passed statewide bans on transgender girls, biological males who identify as females, from playing in girls' sports, that would not be allowed by these federal rules.
That is correct.
Every time transgender girl applies to play for a girls' sports team, they have to consider it on an individual basis. That's what you mean by case to case.
Yes, yeah, that's what I mean exactly. Is that it'd be instead of like a blanket prohibition, there would have to be like an individualized looking at, okay, what does this mean for fairness? What does this mean for safety? And what does this mean for the student who wants to play? And so I think that is, they're trying to find that middle ground there. There's actually been a lot of pushback from, organizations on the farther left. And there's also been some pushback from Republican governors and superintendents who've said, Republican governors and superintendents have said, this is, unfair and it's potentially unsafe. And those kind of raise the concerns that you mentioned about Swampscott, right? About, biological males playing with biological females on the same field. But there's also been criticism that this doesn't go far enough in letting transgender athletes play with a sport that they want to. And so, that there would not be just like a full open access for transgender students to play on whatever sport they want.
Brennan, we're just about out of time, but one last question for you. What do we know about, it was supposed to be done in October. The U.S. Department of Education needed more time. Is there a specific timetable in place? Are we just sort of waiting and we don't know?
Yeah, we're waiting and we don't know. I asked them for the specifics on the timing, and they just said that they're working overtime, that they've received a lot of comments, and so there's no definitive timetable. So I think we're just kind of gonna get that when we get that, whenever they have that. So I don't know if it's this year. I don't know if it's gonna be early next year. And that's all the information I have on that.
Well, thank you for your insight, Brendan. We will continue, and our listeners can continue to follow this news story and look for any updates at chalkboardnews.com. But we are out of time. For Brendan Clary, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe. Thank you for listening.
Do you care about school spending, classroom curriculums, and transparency policies in education, but find it hard to cut through the partisan noise? The nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news reporting on education through Chalkboard News. We're talking news without spin. Franklin brings fact-based news that makes sense to everyday parents, teachers, and readers who have skin in the game. By donating to Franklin, you can help American families and communities receive the education-focused news they deserve. Become a supporter today at franklinnews.org/donate.